you'll recall what happens with this is an arguer will allege that we can't or shouldn't take a first catastrophic step. And it goes something like this. They say, well, if we take step V, it won't be long until we end up where? Won't be long until we end up at Z. Well, guess what Z it almost always is in a slippery slope argument? Yeah, it's almost always some kind of awful condition that they contend will result if we take this first step. Now, it turns out that slippery slopes aren't always fallacies. They are fallacies whenever we unreasonably conclude that taking a first step will necessarily take us down that metaphorical slippery slope. It's a fallacy partly because it fails to do what? It fails to justify intermediate steps. Now, there's a couple of textbook examples in the practice problems that will probably be completely easy for you to point out as slippery slopes. They're very common in debates concerning gun control, and you know how it goes? Somebody might promote a policy that will take some very small step towards limiting the number of sales of handguns per month, or making it a little bit more difficult to get a concealed carry permit. But before you know it, if we take this step, pretty soon that you won't be allowed to buy any guns, and the stormtroopers will show up and confiscate your guns. So you see what we did there? We take what appears to be a benign first step, and it ends up leading down to some kind of catastrophic state of affairs. Now, I'm not saying that it's not going to lead there, but what I'm saying is that it is fallacious because it fails to justify why taking what looks like an apparently benign small step is going to lead down a whole lot of steps to disaster. Now, by the way, it is a little bit difficult to tell a slippery slope argument from a slippery slope fallacy. And I'll give you a version of a slippery slope argument, and I don't know if it's a fallacy or not. I'm admitting it. This will be a partial account of John Stuart Mill on freedom of speech. John Stuart Mill was a champion of what we would call civil libertarian positions. He argued that free speech ought only to be abridged in situations in which very real harm would result. Of course, the standard case is not yelling fire in a crowded building because it would be likely to cause a stampede. Now, he believed that we shouldn't be restricting speech, and he was particularly talking about political speech. And by the way, folks, art is also included in political speech. Art and literature also count as political speech. He didn't believe that we should ban books or suppress freedom of speech because it might make people what? Offended. Because the argument goes something like this. If we decide that we're going to ban this particular kind of speech act because people might be offended, wait till the next people get into power. Then we'll see what they plan on banning. Because not everybody's offended by the same thing. And if you start giving in to every single group who doesn't want to be offended, no speech acts are safe. no political speech is safe. Now you notice that argument is the slippery slope pattern. Taking a small step towards limiting political speech ends up putting all political speech at potential risk. It follows a slippery slope pattern, but I'm not sure if it's a slippery slope fallacy or a slippery slope argument, because he does a pretty good job of talking about the kind of chain reaction that just might happen. And some of us think that some situations like that have happened. If you consider how many books have been taken out of the curriculum because people might get offended by them. Remember, anything that might offend them pornographic, and that's their definition of pornography is not my definition of pornography. Not that that matters or anything. But things that might question the position of women in society has been considered offensive literature by some people. Being too critical of the status quo has been considered offensive by some people. Books like Brave New World in 1984 have been banned at various times for so-called lewdness. But those are important books that I think everybody should read. Thus, when we don't read these books, we become less literate for dealing with the here and now. So anyway, long story short, sorry I was long-winded there, in the case of John Stuart Mill's slippery slope argument concerning free speech, I'm not prepared to call it a fallacy. I am prepared to call it a slippery slope argument, however. Thank you.